wearing a sweater that was selected for you by the people in this room from a pile of stuff.
Give me a full ballerina skirt and a hint of saloon, and I'm on board.
Welcome to She Became Visible. Welcome to Wisdom Wednesday. And today I'm going to be highlighting the podcast that I recently did once again with Erika from @2nomos. And I will put the link in the description. But Kate was out of town again, and Erika asked if I would co-host. And of course, I was thrilled because she is so much fun. And also because the guest was Megan Connor. And Megan has been a guest on She Became Visible before. She will be again in the future. She is absolutely amazing. She has her own YouTube. She has her own podcast. I will also link that in the description. So without further ado, let me turn you over to Erika, and I will be showing you the wonderful podcast and YouTube that we did with Megan Connor.
She was a total heathen.
All right, we're doing a podcast.
Hello, everybody, and welcome to another episode of An Exmo and a Nevermo Walk Into a Bar. We have Rene Steelman co-hosting today. Kate is out today, so Rene is stepping in. She has co-hosted with us before. Hello, Rene.
Hello, love it. Love co-hosting with you.
We do too. We just love having you on, either when it's both me and Kate or when it's just me. It's great. So super happy to have you back. Thank you so much for stepping in. We love your voice.
My pleasure.
And we have a very special guest with us here today, Megan Connor. You may have heard of her. She has her own podcast. I will let her introduce herself, and she's going to be telling a bit of her story, which is super fascinating, super interesting. I will say before she introduces herself, this will be dealing with some heavier subject matter today. Just a trigger warning for sexual violence, sexual abuse, and that kind of thing. So you may need to step away. You may need to take a break. If that is uncomfortable material for you, maybe you just don't watch this episode. And with that, I will let Megan introduce herself.
Well, thank you. Thanks for having me. And Rene, it's great to see you again.
Good to see you as well. Missed you in Arizona.
Yeah. We're like ships passing in the night. We never
Exactly.
got a chance to get together, but
Exactly.
and thank you, Erika, for having me on. I've been a fan of your show for a long time, actually. I think I ran across it on Instagram one night and I thought, how great is this? Like drinking and talking about Mormonism. I think it's like the perfect combination.
Thank you
The
so
only
much.
way it should be done.
Exactly. Nobody should
Thank
have
you.
to deal with Mormonism sober.
I certainly could not.
So I do have a podcast. It's called The Midlife Revolution. It's all about making small changes that end up becoming revolutionary, helping people to change just one small thing at a time. And I do one-on-one coaching for that. I also have an e-course that I developed about how to recognize and defend against manipulation and controlling people. And I've just been enjoying this little journey. I wrote a book, during my healing from trauma, and I started out in the social media space just talking about the myths surrounding sex trafficking and trying to help people understand how to educate our kids about it better and how to educate everyone about it. Ironically, my book, which is called I Walked Through Fire to Get Here, it's available on Amazon. And ironically, it was published the same day that the Sound of Freedom movie came out, which for those who don't know, the Sound of Freedom is a movie about Tim Ballard, the founder of Operation Underground Railroad. And he and his company claimed to be saving children who had been trafficked. And turns out that's not the case, allegedly. He's got several lawsuits pending against him. His company's kind of been dismantled. He's been discredited. He's been excommunicated. So we don't have to talk about that, or we can talk about it a little because there's a little bit of overlap. But essentially, I was trafficked as a child from the ages of 7 to 11. It happened in my neighborhood. It was the neighborhood babysitter and her husband. After we moved away from that place, I sort of blocked everything out for a really long time, but I was clinically depressed and I didn't know it. And add to that the fact that my family of origin was very dysfunctional, emotionally neglectful, emotionally abusive, very controlling environment, pretty typical actually for a lot of Mormons who grow up very strict Mormons. And so that just led me into this cycle of getting into relationships and situations in my life where I was constantly being mistreated or abused or taken advantage of, I sort of had a pivotal wake up moment that forced me to stop dissociating from how bad everything had been. I sort of went through life as a typical Mormon person, trying to say how happy I was and that, you know, I had basically good childhood, but it was kind of bad, but it was okay because, you know, I laid my burden at the feet of Jesus, and he took that burden on himself, and I feel great. So that was my form of dissociation for the majority of my life until I was about 35. And then I had a wake up moment. My dad called me one day and he's like, hey, I just want to get together for lunch and kind of talk about, you know, what kind of a dad I was and what things were like growing up. And I was like, nope, no, thank you. I do not want to do that. I was like,
Wow.
we're
Good for
adults.
you.
I don't live with you anymore. We don't need to rehash all of that trauma. I was like, I'm good. Let's just let bygones be bygones. But I talked with my sister. My sister and I have always been very, very close, and told her about it. And she said, yeah, you know, he contacted me for the same reason, and actually found out afterwards that I really understand him better. We have a better relationship, and I think it was good, and I think you should do it. And so I agreed. We sat down and had that lunch, and it was basically like a big trauma dump. And my dad just trying to kind of unburden his feelings of guilt and shame over his parenting mistakes and some other things in his life. And I found out later that he was attending the LDS Addiction Recovery Program. And this was the sort of make amends step that he was going through. And I should say, just, you know, to protect my dad a little bit, first of all, that program is really fucked up. Nobody who is not a mental health professional should be designing an addiction recovery program that is spiritually based and has absolutely zero to do with mental health. So let's just put that on the table, first of all. And then secondly, to say that, like, there was a time around the 2012, 13, 14, 15 era in the church where the LDS leadership was encouraging every single man to go through the addiction recovery program. A lot of people ended up labeled as addicts when there literally is no such thing as a sexual addiction. I go into this in my book, actually, because it was so pivotal. The church leadership was basically saying, like, if you're going to be in a leadership position in the church, you need to go through this program because all of us have addictions of some kind. And I will just tell you that he didn't need to go through that program. It ended up causing a lot of relational problems, not only for him, but for us and all of us. But that sort of unburdening that he was going through really forced me to look at my childhood and my past for what it really was, rather than the whitewashed version that I had told myself was real because it was less painful. And I ended up having just horrible physical symptoms of depression and anxiety. I couldn't get out of bed for days. I would just cry nonstop whenever I had to go to my parents. And we were both living in San Antonio, my parents and me and my former spouse and kids. And we were over there every single Sunday for dinner and for every holiday, every birthday, all of that stuff. And so it got to the point where I just was debilitated. And I really thought to myself, I need to check myself into an institution. But I had 6 kids. And I was a teacher full time. I was a choir director, which meant that my teaching job really was like 40, 50, 60 hours a week. And I was like, well, I can't really do that right now. So I was like, I'll wait till summer and then I'll check myself in somewhere and completely lose it. So that's kind of what started my therapy journey and my healing journey.
I don't know if you've ever heard of Roxane Gay, but she has a wonderful book out there that she talks about her childhood and, you know, being sexually molested by a gang of boys and things like that. And she's really big into the idea that we are triggered. And she's kind of a little bit of a controversial figure in that area because, you know, her thesis is that if you accept that I can't hear this or I can't hear that because that will make me remember or that will trigger me and I can't handle that. She said, where does that stop? Where does it stop? What trigger, you know, this triggers, you know, I remember when I had someone rear end me, and for a long time when I would go up to a stop sign, I would be like, because I would like, oh, I'm going to get rear ended again, but that goes away. Yeah. But you look at the people, like the men that came back from World War II that didn't talk about it. Nobody asked them any questions. And so it's like, is it really helping? Is the, oh, I don't talk about it, I don't want to look at it, I'll be triggered. Is that really solving or helping you heal. And as you're saying, it sounds as though it didn't, because, and I don't remember who it was. There was someone who talked about, they went to President Hinckley and said, look, I'm, SA'd by this person. And he's like, you know what? That was in the past. Let's look into the future. Let's go forward. And that's that generation of mentality as well, is like, let's not dwell on the past. Let's just look at what you've got now and move forward. So forgive and forget type thing.
Yeah.
So I love where you're coming from and how you've said, no, we're going to handle this. We're going to make this work. I'm going to address it. And I'm no longer going to be quiet or whatever, So I love your insight into trauma, really.
Well, I'm so glad that you're saying this, because one of the things I say in my book is that I do not believe in trigger warnings, because I believe that and it's okay. Don't Erika, this is not
I started the episode with a trigger warning.
It's not a criticism of you at all, because everybody has to handle it in their different way. But what I believe is that our triggers are there to teach us something. Yeah. And if we don't address it, if we don't heal it, we're going to end up passing it on. We're going to end up going through those same cycles over and over and over again. And I actually will tell you, in my therapy journey, I found a wonderful therapist who did dialectical behavioral therapy as well as cognitive behavioral therapy, which is just a way of kind of changing the way that you think about things. I learned so much from her, and it was so beneficial. But at the end of 3 years, she said to me, essentially, Rene, what you were just saying. She said, you know what, you obviously have some trauma from your childhood. Maybe it's okay that you don't remember everything. In fact, maybe that's kind of a blessing. And maybe you just go through life and you have triggers, but you learn how to manage them. And I'm sitting there listening to her, trying to really absorb what she's saying, because it feels wrong in my body. But I was trying to understand it from her point of view. And she gave me this scenario. She said, let's just say that, a few years from now, you're at a party, you're having a conversation with some people, and somebody brings up the fact that they had a bad babysitter when they were a kid and they got abused. This is neither here. She didn't even know the details of my abuse or anything, but she said that thing and I was like,
yeah.
And she said, that conversation's probably going to make you really uncomfortable. You might have a panic attack, but you just keep your Xanax with you at all times, just in case you need it. And you just excuse yourself into the bathroom. You have a good cry. And you come back out and you say, you know what, something that you said just really bothered me. And I needed a moment to just be emotional, and I'm okay now. And I was like, no, I do not want to live like that.
Yes.
I do not want to live my life apologizing for emotions that I can't control.
Oh, excellent.
And so I just said, thank you, and moved on. I actually did write to her after I completed my EMDR to just tell her I'm doing great, but she never responded, which I'm sure that was inappropriate communication or whatever it is. But I ended up looking into trauma-informed therapy, and that's where I found EMDR, and it saved my life, literally.
I love that. And we talked a little bit about this before we started the episode. I have done a very tiny amount of EMDR. One of my best friends has done it for lots of stuff that she's gone through, and she's recommended it. I've done a lot of talk therapy. And for people who don't know, it's eye movement, eye movement desensitization
and reprocessing.
Thank you.
Yeah.
So you basically are, if you don't know what it is, both sides of your brain are stimulated. Either I used paddles, but I know some people will actually do the eye movement. The paddles really worked for me because I could close my eyes and do the visualization that I needed to do. And in my instance, and you can tell me if this is similar to you, the therapist talks to you or has you talk up to a 10, basically, where you are at pretty serious emotional distress, and then brings you back down and does this every 10 seconds and checks in with you, where are you processing this really, really crappy thing that has happened to you and going to the shittiest parts of it. And when you're doing it, it sucks. I was trying to get through some stuff very quickly that I needed to process. So I did sort of back-to-back sessions over a couple of weeks. And I went into my therapist and I said, I am physically ill. I can't stop crying. I'm actually being physically ill. This is very bad. Is this supposed to be happening? And she said, it's working, and you just need to get through these few days, and your brain is processing this information in the background. And she was right. Like, it was like a miracle. It was like I took a magic pill, and later I could deal with this shit that was so hard. Did you have the same experience, Megan?
It was very similar for me, although it would not have been wise for me to back any of the trauma that I had gone through, because
Yeah.
there was so much. And that was part of the thing that I really didn't want to do, was go to a new therapist and start all over and make a list of all the things that I had been through and that were still bothering me. That felt so daunting to me. And it was like, my first session was probably 2 hours long, and I was exhausted at the end of it, and I did not feel better, and I did not want to come back. But my EMDR guy, I will just say, is the best in the world at what he does. And I haven't been to any other EMDR therapist, but his approach was really exactly what I needed. And one of the things he told me is that he said, I'm never going to ask you the details of what you went through unless you just need someone to be a witness to your pain. And that was really relieving to me, because I was like, I can't imagine like having to talk about every single detail. If I have to do that, I think I would rather die. Was actually the first thing that we did is after I did that initial session of telling all of the trauma things that I need to work through, he taught me about having a calm place. And we did this calm place exercise where I visualized basically my happy place, some place that I feel, calm and relaxed. And he had me visualize and try to experience physically all of the things that I would see and hear and feel in that space. So I'll tell you, my calm place is a little corner, the southwest corner of Central Park. There's a little stone bridge, and there's a pond where the ducks swim. Even in the winter, they swim, and like there's ice around the edges, but there are ducks right in the center. And a lot of my trauma took place in South Dakota, where it was cold and snow. So I felt like my calm place needed to be someplace I could feel safe in the cold and the snow again. And so my calm place was sitting on that bench with a cup of hot chocolate, watching the ducks swim and hearing the trees move in the wind. And you know how trees, when they get kind of coated with ice, they sort of crackle in the wind. And so it was all of the sights and the sounds and feelings of that. So he was basically teaching me how to go to a place in my mind where I was safe from all of the traumatic feelings that I had. And so at the end of each session, we would do that calm place exercise with the tappers in my hands, so that my brain was really processing it and sort of instilling. So in the same way that you have a traumatic event and it just like immediately makes an impact on your brain, this calm place was making a positive impact on my brain. Because what happens during EMDR is that as your eyes move back and forth, it does mimic that same thing that happens during REM sleep, where you are getting restorative, just energy coming into your brain. And it basically removes the negative emotional effect from the experience. So you still remember every part of the experience, but you no longer have an adverse emotional effect when you're reflecting on the experience.
Interesting.
And so I did EMDR once a week for probably 3 years.
Wow.
Actually, it was once a week for 2 years. And then I did an intensive outpatient therapy program, which we can talk about in a little bit. But I will tell you, EMDR is not for everybody, first of all. It doesn't work on everyone. And also, please remember that I had been through extensive talk therapy before I started EMDR. If I had started with EMDR, I don't know if it would have worked.
Same here.
So, but I will also tell you, I got a rush of anxiety every single time I drove into the parking lot of my therapist's office, because it's the same thing as when I go to the gym. I was like, I know this is going to suck and it's going to hurt, but I'm going to feel better afterwards, And there were so many times when I would drive home and just be so completely drained that I couldn't move. For the first few sessions, that's how it felt. And I had a little ritual where I would go home, I would make myself a nice steak, I would have a nice glass of wine or a nice glass of whiskey, and just for the rest of the night, and just give myself permission to not move or do anything else, because my brain was like working. Sometimes I'd have weird dreams after, I wouldn't be able to sleep very well, but the following day I would feel really good. It didn't happen until about the third or fourth session or so, but I remember so very clearly waking up one morning without that heavy weight on my chest
Hmm.
and going, oh my God, is this what normal people feel like all the time?
Gosh.
Like you just wake up and you want to get out of bed? This is incredible. I was like, I couldn't believe it because I had been so severely depressed for so many years and just going through the motions of my life and going, well, I guess this is about as good as it gets, you know?
Wow.
But coming out of EMDR after those first few sessions and feeling like I felt like a fucking rock star. And I was like, I can't believe that this is just how everybody else has been walking through their life. And I've been, you know, on a scale of 1 to 10, where 10 is euphorically happy and 1 is I'm going to end it right now. I lived my life at a 3 or a 4 most days. After that session, I was like, I think I'm an 8.
Wow.
Wow, this is amazing.
Well, I was going to ask, where was your family at this point when you're going through the EMDR? You know, children wise, were they, when you said you could go home and still unwind? So were the kids kind of grown and independent and?
Well, not totally.
Okay.
So my youngest daughter was born in 2009. My talk with my dad happened in 2014.
Oh,
And I went no contact with my parents for a good 2 years
yeah.
to try and heal from that. So I finished my talk therapy in about 2017-ish, beginning of 2017.
Okay. So
And
still young.
yeah, and what's really interesting is that I went into therapy because of that situation with my dad triggering all of these horrible emotions coming up. I went into therapy to try to repair my relationship with my parents.
Oh,
That's the
yeah.
main reason I went into therapy. It wasn't even like
Interesting.
I have all this trauma to unpack. It was like, we don't get along. How can we fix this? You know, I'm triggered by them. How do we change that?
Yeah.
And the interesting thing is that what kept coming up over and over instead of my relationship with my parents was my marriage over and over and over.
Interesting.
And that therapy, so first of all, it was the first therapist that I had been to that was not from LDS Family Services. And that's very important to note because
Yeah.
Mormon therapists, I think now there are a lot of good ones out there. In fact, if you're looking for a good Mormon therapist who's not going to just tell you to pray harder,
Yeah.
you can go to the Mormon Mental Health Association. This is a group of therapists in the Utah, Arizona, Idaho area who have banded together to make sure that religion stays out of therapy, which is where
Yeah.
it belongs.
But they know your lingo and they know
Right.
that
They know your
the
lingo.
water that you were swimming in.
They know your trauma. They know your
Yeah.
soup. Yeah, it's a big deal to have somebody who understands that, I think, because
Right.
I didn't get that. And Mormonism was the last thing that I unpacked. So, so LDS Family Services, I wasted a lot of time with different therapists there. And actually they did a lot of harm as well, telling me that I was wrong to, want what I wanted, which was kindness and respect for my husband, that kind of stuff. So
How dare you?
yeah,
I mean,
I know, so rude.
yeah,
So
really.
entitled. So this therapist, not being Mormon, I will never forget the session where I was sitting there with her. We were discussing some of the different dynamics in my marriage and my relationship, and she slid over this little graphic that was the wheel of power and control. And it was all about different kinds of abuse, spiritual abuse, emotional abuse, financial abuse. It wasn't just physical abuse, and for me, I was like, is that a thing? And she's like, well, actually that's a form of emotional abuse if he's being verbally abusive to you. And I remember leaving that session and I went, oh shit, I'm in an abusive marriage.
Oh,
And I went to my bishop because that's what you do.
yeah.
And I
The
said,
plumber.
right.
Yeah.
He was a software designer.
Oh, okay.
And
Similar.
had a very, 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 very large family. I met with him like on a weeknight in his home because I was like, this is an emergency. And I sat down with him and I said, I think I'm in an abusive marriage. What do I do? And he was like, well, what do you mean by abusive? And I started to describe like the emotional abuse that was happening, and the coercive control is what it really was. Like I was not allowed to go anywhere or do anything unless I was in constant contact with my spouse.
Oh my gosh.
And if I went to the grocery store and it was taking longer than about an hour, he would text me a question mark.
Oh.
And that was just like his way of saying, where the hell are you?
Yeah.
And so it was that kind of a situation. I didn't really have my own life, but I didn't realize how bad that was and how detrimental it was to my mental health and everything. So I started to describe these things to him and say, you know, that he's really mean to me a lot of the time. And he tries to make me feel like I'm really small. And he tries to make me feel like he gaslights me. I didn't have that word yet, but I would say, like, I'm trying to describe what's happening to me in my experience. And he basically tells me, like, that's not happening. And I think the example that I used, I would say, hey, can you turn off the air conditioning? I'm really cold. And he would go, it's not cold.
Oh my gosh.
You know?
Yeah.
And I was like, right, I feel cold, you know?
And I'm going to tell you what you feel.
Yeah, exactly.
Which is like the insanity of that.
Well, the insidious thing about it though was he was not telling me I was not cold.
Yeah.
He was saying it's not cold. So the
Yeah.
So
fact that you
something's wrong
feel
with you.
cold doesn't make sense because
Yeah.
it's not cold. If
Yeah,
it's not cold, how do you feel cold? Why would you feel
That's
cold?
literally when you trace the gaslighting term from, that's literally what it's not so much, you know, like the church is so prevalent in there, like, we never said that you'd have your own planet. Where'd you get that idea?
Right.
You know, so it really is literally like everyone else in this room knows that it's not cold. So you obviously have an issue. Was there ever anything that you were finally able to understand? Was he projecting his own indiscretions upon you? Like, I know I have a what used to be a best friend whose husband was a little bit similar to that. And then you find out, well, no, you haven't, you know, you have you're just a narcissist, you know, it was all about him. And so they start accusing you of what they're doing, you know, that kind of thing.
I call this you spot it, you got it. We saw it throughout my dumb cousin Lori's trial all the time. You know, anything she was accusing someone else of doing, she was doing it. And I was constant, like the main sticking point in our entire relationship was that I was constantly being accused of cheating on him. And I knew that I wasn't. And there was even one specific instance when he was like, I have pictures. And I was like, the fuck
Can
do
I
you
see
do?
him?
I was like,
Yeah.
I know you don't have pictures because I know nothing happened. You know? So I was like, okay, show me the pictures. And it was the one time I was able to call his bluff. And I was like, okay, what's going on here? So we kept repeating this same pattern over and over where he would accuse me of that. I would try to explain that that's not what was going on. I would try to justify whatever. But because I'm an empath, I would go, okay, what did I do that could be construed as that? He didn't ever want me to text or call anybody of the opposite sex ever. And I was like, well, it's not really possible when you're a teacher and you're working with other teachers, you know. The other teacher in my same classroom was a man, you know. It's like, I have to communicate. It just got to the point where the same things were coming up over and over. And we, you know, I was in therapy. She was telling me about this. Oh, I was going to get back to what my bishop said. So when I told my bishop, when I explained to him what this emotional abuse was looking and feeling like, he goes, well, sometimes I say things to my wife that I don't really mean. I don't really think that's abusive. And I'm not saying this to shame him.
I didn't mean to say you're a big fat slob. I was just having a bad day.
Right. So I'm not saying this to shame him at all. And I'm not saying this because I hold any ill will against him at all. But just to let people know, these people who are bishops, they are charged with the emotional and spiritual well-being of their entire congregation, and they have zero training in mental health. Zero. So this poor bishop had no idea what emotional abuse was. And so the next day I emailed him a copy of that graphic of the power and control wheel. And I said, you know, Bishop, there are all kinds of different abuses out there. And I really hope that you will study this so that the next time somebody comes to you, that you'll be informed enough to show them compassion and to advise them properly. Because I was going to my bishop basically saying, I'm in an abusive marriage. I know that abuse is one of the reasons that it's like okay to get a divorce. What should I do? Because I truly did not know what to do. I had been in this marriage for basically 20 years at this point. We had been through 2 rounds of marriage counseling with LDS Family Services already. I knew that he had been physically abusive, but I had sort of pushed that away of like, oh, it's only a couple of times, he hasn't done it in a long time. It was when he was drinking, he's not drinking anymore. So I had sort of explained away all of these reasons, and I felt in some ways like I had missed my chance to leave, because what I was thinking was like, you should have left when he put his hands around your throat. And now you don't really have a good excuse like that. It's just that things are hard,
Wow.
And so I really wanted some advice, and he couldn't help me, basically. So I stayed for another couple of years. We went back to marriage counseling, and I finally recognized that the same issues were coming up over and over, and that he was wanting to talk about symptoms instead of causes, and we were just not getting anywhere. And I was so incredibly depressed that I just really didn't know what to do with myself, and I needed space and I needed time. And so I took myself out to dinner one night, which was like a supremely bad, big no. Like that was bad. I just told him, I said, I need some space. I'm going to go for a drive. And after a couple of hours, here come the question marks, And so I went to a local taco place that I really love. I ordered a margarita, and I was like, I'm going to have a margarita. This is faithful TBM me with a temple recommend and all of that stuff. And I was like, I need to just get this stuff out of my brain, because if I keep thinking about it, I'm going to go insane. So I had a margarita, and then he kept texting me, and then I had another margarita.
Oh,
and then
no.
He kept texting me, and I was like, okay. So I texted him. He was asking me, where are you? Why aren't you answering your phone? Blah, blah, blah. I said, I went to go get something to eat. I'll be home later. And later is a bad word because it's not descriptive enough, So the texting continued. So I paid my bill. I went out to the car. I was like the last one in the parking lot. I was like, I'm not safe to drive right now, because not only have I had a couple of margaritas, but I'm also emotionally distraught. I was like, this is a bad combination. And so dummy me, not being educated about alcohol at all in any way, shape, or form, other than that one class that I took when I first got my driver's license at 16. So I took his Annex, because I was like, I know that's emotionally, I'm going to be okay, right? So yada, yada, yada. 30 minutes later, I was in the back seat of my car, lying down, and I texted my former spouse, and I was like, I was like, I'm okay, but I just need to rest. And I said, I'm in the back seat of the car resting, and I'll be home later. And so I finally was able to go home around 3:00 in the morning, which was bad. When I showed up, it was who were you with? What were you doing? I know you weren't alone. I know. So it was, again, like the same pattern.
Yeah.
And I just don't know what it was about it, but I was like, I am not doing this again.
Yeah.
And I told him, like, during that conversation, I was like, I think we just need to get divorced. And he was like, well, I think you should think about it. This was a Saturday night. The next day was Sunday. And I was like, okay, you know what? I didn't say this out loud to him, but I was like, you know what? I'm going to fast and pray all day tomorrow. And then at the end of the day, I will make my final decision. But in my mind, I said, I'm going to hold this thought in my mind that we're getting divorced, and I'm done, and I'm not doing this again. And throughout the day, I'm just going to fast and pray. I'm going to go to church. I'm going to absorb everything that I hear. Maybe God will have a special message for me. Maybe I will feel some confirmation one way or the other. And according to Mormon doctrine, if this is the wrong idea, I'm going to completely forget about it. I'm going to completely forget that I even said the word divorce, because you're supposed to have that stupor of thought, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
So I did all that. And when I got home from church, I can honestly say that I felt incredibly peaceful about getting a divorce. And that's what I told him. I said, I just feel really peaceful about this decision. And ironically enough, the next day was Valentine's Day, and we had an appointment with our marriage counselor.
Hate those holidays.
I know. So, so he said, well, why don't we keep our appointment tomorrow, and maybe she can help us work through what needs to be done or whatever. He was still definitely not accepting the fact that I wanted a divorce.
Yeah.
So I very wisely, I think, offered the idea that maybe we should take separate cars to the appointment, because I did not want to be riding home in a car with somebody that I just dumped.
Great idea.
And so we took separate cars, we went up there, we sat together on her tiny little couch in her tiny little office. And this poor woman was a young, idealistic marriage and family therapist. Her parents had gotten divorced. And so it became her crusade to save as many marriages as she could. And the first session that we were with her, she said, "You're not my client. You're not my client. Your marriage is my client."
Oh,
And she said, "I'm here for the health and happiness of your marriage, no matter what." And I was like, okay, that seems weird, but all right. So, I told her what had happened, and I told her that, I was done and I was ready to get divorced. And we kind of talked about some of the things the issues that had come up, like the physical abuse. And I was like, we talked about that, but then what he said was, "It happened years ago. I was drunk. It hasn't happened since. So I don't know why you're still bothered by it. Can't you just put it in the past and leave it behind?" And I was like, "No." And I don't know why. What's wrong with me? I should just be able to forgive you,
yeah.
And move forward. And so I brought that thing up and I said, it just feels like every time I have a problem that I'm bringing up, it's not my fault. It's not his fault. He's like, "Well, that's not my fault."
Yeah. Yeah.
Maybe there's something wrong with you. And that was kind of seemed to be the theme, that like, you're cheating on
It's,
me, you're holding a grudge, you
Yeah.
can't move on, all of that
yes.
stuff. And I said, I can't do that anymore. I can't go through another cycle where I say, "This is a problem." And he goes, "Okay, I'll do better." And then 2 days later, it's the same crap again.
Yeah.
I said, my body and my spirit and my soul cannot handle doing that again. And I
Yeah.
really am done. And he said to me, "Do you think that there's any chance that we could reconcile?" And the very loving, forgiving, empathic part of me wanted to be like, "Yeah, sure. Like, if you go to therapy, if you, go to individual therapy, if you work on your stuff, there's a chance down the road." And for the very first time in my life, I ignored that voice because I played it forward in my head and I was like, "This is not going to end well."
Yeah.
It was impossible. It was like, it was against everything that I had been programmed to do my entire life, to cause someone else pain. And I knew that it was going to hurt him, maybe irreparably, because I knew how fragile he was. I knew it was going to hurt my children. And my biggest fear up to this point, the whole reason why I had never gotten divorced 8 years ago when I should have, was because I didn't believe that I could provide for my children. And I knew he wasn't going to pay child support. I knew he wasn't going to do any of that stuff. So I was terrified. I was terrified of supporting 6 kids by myself on a teacher's salary. And that's kind of what kept me stuck, and what kept me in there was that fear that I couldn't do it on my own.
Complete dependence. Yeah.
Yeah. And so it was the very first moment in my life that I chose what was the best, most loving, kindest thing for me, rather than subjugating my own needs to spare someone else pain. And it was a complete breakthrough.
That's amazing.
And I said,
wow.
No, I don't think that we will ever be able to reconcile. I just don't think that I can make that happen.
That's amazing.
And our poor therapist was like, "Well, I'm going to give you guys a couple of minutes." And she went out in the hallway and cried her eyes out.
Oh.
And then she came back with a couple of
So now
glasses
Megan's
of water
trying to help her. "Let me help you. I'll stay married. I don't want you to feel bad."
I know.
Gosh.
And I felt terrible for her. But at the same time, like, it was something had broken in me. There was something in my cognition that went, "That's not my problem."
Now, okay, this is a weird question, but how old were you when this happened? Because you look like you're 23, so let's talk about that. But
I was 43.
Okay, I swear 40 is the magic age. I wish women could understand how beautiful, if you can just get to your 40s when your brain clicks, it is. And there are going to be a lot of divorces or other things like that, but there is something so beautiful about turning 40. I'll tell you, it's amazing.
Yeah.
Forget menopause, whatever, maybe bless menopause as well. It's another time when you go, "Oh, now I'm really done with you." But yeah, no, and it's funny, Megan, because that couple that I was telling you about, they actually ended up getting the most dysfunctional marriage of all of my friends. I mean, same thing. He would, she was an arm ornament for him. And so it was all about what she looked like for him. And so her and I would go to the gym and he would show up. and or he would cruise around and try to see where her
Yep.
car was if we had gone to the movies or something like that.
Yeah.
And it's very dysfunctional. And yet, what do they get called to be? They get called to be the pornography, people in the ward. They were the counselors in the ward with no training whatsoever and complete dysfunction in their home.
Just the fact that there even is a calling called the pornography counselor. Like, you're not a counselor. You can't say that. Like,
Yeah.
that's unethical. And also the fact that we have to have a calling for somebody where that's their job is to
Yeah.
help people with porn addiction.
Yeah, this is probably really stupid, but I remember her calling me so frustrated because she said, my car broke down in the parking lot. I called my husband and he said, I'm sorry, I can't help you. I got to go home teaching, and left her in the parking lot. And I was like, okay, that is such a sign. And yet they were given this calling. And I remember her telling me about some of the people that she had in her little counseling session. I mean, neither one of them have any counseling background at all. Not even, he was a drug rep, and she had no background. And I remember her saying, we've got this one young girl and she's in our therapy thing, and her, she thought that her husband had a pornography addiction. So they got divorced. And I'm like, and so why is she coming to your counseling sessions? Well, she's like, well, she just comes and, she just loves the camaraderie. And I'm like, that's not what therapy is all about. That's not what you do. But, it was absolutely, the whole idea that you call, I'm going to call you to teach the 4-year-olds in primary. And the same, I'm going to call you to counsel people with mental issues or marital issues, and nothing about how psychology works. They think it's the same. It's the same.
They do. Yeah. Because they're like, well, it's spiritually based. And if you just pray, then you're going to get inspiration about what to say to these people. And this is disgusting to me, Rene. I didn't know that this happened. So I'm having a rage moment right now. I am pissed off. If some bishop had called me into his office and said, we're calling you to be the pornography counselor, I would have been like, thank you. No, I do not want to hear about other people's porn problems.
So what you would say was, Bishop, I'm going to accept that calling, but I'm going to check. I have never looked at pornography, but I will spend the entire weekend delving into it. Just so that I have a background, and
if you don't feel it, you can't heal it. So I need to know what this is.
Exactly.
Rene, I want to go back to something that you said just a few minutes ago about women hitting their 40s and just sort of something clicking. My best friend and I, we've known each other since we were 2 years old.
Oh my gosh.
We are both in our late 40s. We're having that exact conversation, I think, yesterday. We Marco Polo, which is like a video texting app. And she got divorced recently in the last few years. Her husband was the worst piece of trash ever. And finally, she was able to find the strength to leave him. She is living her best life. She went on a cruise for the first time by herself. She's exploring all these different, she's like, I think I'm going to go on a trip to Poland next year. And I was like, and I have another friend who's also going through a possible divorce, but I was talking with her yesterday through Marco Polo and just saying, there's something happening right now. So it's funny that it comes up today, because I was like, right now, in this specific moment, women in this demographic are saying, fuck this. Like, I'm going to do what I want to do. I'm going to make myself happy. I'm going to live the way that I want to live. So I just think it's interesting that came up again today. And that's great that happened for you, Megan, as well.
I'm going to show you something too that's interesting, just to give you a little bit of like background of what was happening. Of course, I was going through my therapy journey and everything, but I also was deeply unhappy in my marriage. And I knew that the time and attention that I was spending on trying to manage that situation was taking time and attention away from my children. And that was one of the things that I unpacked with my therapist, was like, oh my God, I just did this horrible thing to my kids. And she said, you didn't do anything. She said, change was coming to you, whether you did it or whether he did it or something was going to break at some point. This change was in the water already. And what you did was you made a choice that now allows you to be a better mother, because you have more time and energy and emotion to be present for your children. So anybody who is out there struggling with this idea of staying for the kids, that's bullshit. Don't do it, because your kids are watching you stay in a relationship where you're miserable. And guess what? They're going to learn from that. That it's okay to stay in situations where you're miserable instead of leaving.
Yeah.
And you did your kids just a world of favor by doing that. One, the way that you're describing your ex-husband is he sounds like he has some damage himself and
Yes.
needs a lot of work. And
Mhm.
that's not good for kids to be around. And to see their other parent being treated like that, and to see
Yeah.
that abuse, whether it is emotional or physical or financial or whatever, to witness that is really damaging for kids. So you
Yeah.
did them a huge favor and made their lives exponentially better by pulling yourself and them out of that situation. So
Right.
that's great. And I hope you feel in
That's
a really good
amazing.
spot about that. Yeah, it's
I
amazing.
do. I feel
Strength.
great about it now, and I realized that what I taught my kids was that you matter. What you want matters, and your mental health
Yes.
matters. So this happened on February 14th of 2017, and the previous Christmas, I don't have a single picture on my camera roll. That's how depressed I was. Like, I'm
Yeah.
all about like taking the pictures and taking the videos, not a single one. And then in January, in fact, January 16th, almost exactly 1 month before that, this is what I did. I cut my hair.
Oh, nice.
And I think it was Coco Chanel who said, "A woman who cuts her hair is about to change her life."
Interesting.
And I didn't know
love
that at
that.
the time. I just was like, this doesn't feel good to me anymore. I want something different, you know?
Yeah, you want to
And
be a
so,
different person almost.
yeah. So I did it over Christmas break, and I came back to school, having chopped my hair off, and my students were like, oh, they were completely freaking out.
Yeah.
And it was sort of like, it was this series of conversations that I had with people who matter to me, and this series of events where I started choosing myself. And I'll tell you where the pivot came. After one of my very first sessions with this therapist, I was like, I got to hurry home. Husband doesn't want me gone for more than an hour. My session's an hour. I better be home in an hour and 10 minutes. And I was like, man, I feel awful. I really just want to like drive to Nordstrom Rack and go touch pretty fabric. That's all I want to do. Like, I want to look at shoes that I'm never going to buy. I want to touch pretty fabric. I want to look at home goods that are ridiculous and pillows that should never exist and stuff like that. I was like, he's going to be really pissed. I'm going to have to deal with the fallout of that. But I was like, but I really need to do that. I need to decompress after this, because if I go and walk back into that environment right now, I'm going to be a zombie.
Yeah.
I can't deal with him. I can't help my kids. I can't make dinner. I can't do any of that. I was like, I just need this. It was that one tiny act of rebellion against the system I was in. That is what self-care is.
Yeah.
Self-care is choosing
So
the thing that
great.
you need,
Yeah.
even when other people need things from you.
Yeah.
And it was that one little thing that gave me permission to do that one little thing. And then I gave myself permission to get a pedicure for the first time in my life at the age of 42.
Yeah.
Because spending money on myself is selfish when my kids need things.
Yeah, exactly.
And then I cut my hair, and then, it was just one thing after another of me choosing me for the first time in my life.
And I love that, because all I can think when you are talking about the sort of the restraints that he had on you in terms of knowing you need to be home, like there's the amount of anxiety and stress of carrying that around on your back, this other person's, all of their trauma, their insecurity, their anxiety. And then they're basically just saying, here, you carry that. So you're carrying around all of his insecurities by, I need to get home. And if I'm not home, he's going to be really upset and I'm going to have to deal with that, when that's his problem. And that's not something that you should have to deal with. So I love that you had a moment where you were like, I'm going to do this other thing. I know what the repercussions of that are going to be, and that this is going to affect this person and by proxy me, but I'm going to do this because this is what I need. And that's like sounds like the gateway out, which is like so lovely to find this little space for yourself where this person has taken that away from you for a very long time. So kudos to you. That's amazing.
Thank you. And it wasn't just him. It was the system that I was raised in. It was my family. It was my religion. It was my marriage. It was my programming that I received at the age of 7 years old, where I was told, you don't matter.
Yeah.
What you want doesn't matter.
Yeah.
You are here for this purpose and this purpose only. And this is the only purpose you're ever going to serve in your life.
Right.
So that programming instilled in such a young age, at the time when we are forming our ideas about the world around us and ourselves, I was being constantly told, not just by my abuser, but by my religious authorities and by my
Yeah.
parents, that you're
Yeah.
a girl, you don't matter.
Yeah.
You don't get the priesthood. Your only role in this life is to support your husband and have children.
Yeah.
It's not for you to have a role. You know, if you happen to get called as the Relief Society president, well, you're doing that on your own. It's not like your husband is standing behind you, supporting you as the Relief
Right.
Society president. You're
Right.
doing that on your own while also still supporting your husband and taking care of the kids.
Right.
So my former spouse was not a Mormon when I married him. That's all a whole different story, rabbit hole for another time. But he did eventually join the church after we'd been married for a couple of years, but he was only active for a few months before he was like, this is weird, I'm out. And so I took on the role of the martyr, and I was like, I'm going to go to church every single Sunday. I'm going to take all 6 of my kids there by myself. I will never forget, the lowest point for me was when I had just given birth to my 4th child. She was a little over 6 weeks old, so it was time to go back to church. And so I had a 7-year-old, a 5-year-old, a 3-year-old, and a newborn.
Oh my goodness.
And, you know, so I got my kids all ready. Church was at 8 a.m.
Oh, jeez.
And so because we were sharing a building with 3 other wards. And so, you know, I got up, got my kids all ready, got everybody in the car, got the carrier, what do you call that? The car seat carrier thing. And I was late, of course. And so I went into the cultural hall, which is behind the chapel, wooden floor, metal chairs.
Yeah.
And because I didn't want to disrupt the service and we were late and my kids were going to be noisy. And so we go to the last row, we sit down, I set the baby carrier on the ground, and my 7-year-old went out that door and my 5-year-old went out that door, and the baby started crying. And I was like, I don't know what to do right now.
Yeah.
So I was just unbuckling her from the carrier. She started to cry. So I picked her up. I was like, 3-year-old, okay, take my hand. So I have her by the hand and I've got a baby like this. And I'm going to chase after my 7-year-old and my 5-year-old, who were very rambunctious and had gone out opposite sides of the door. And there's like just a big oval. It's just a racetrack to my son.
Yeah.
You know, he's like, how fast can I go? And I just went, I can't do this. And I picked up the carrier and I got those 2 kids buckled into the car, managed to hunt down the other ones, bring them I left my kids in the car because what else I gonna do?
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah.
And it's not like, the thing is, it's not like I could have, and this is a really sad commentary, I could not have tapped somebody on the shoulder and said, hey, can you help me round up my kids? Because I didn't want to be a burden to other people and disrupt their worship. Not only that, I was very aware of the fact that people talked about me all the time in church. Like, what can we do to help this sister? Her kids are very rambunctious. You know, we need them to be quiet. And I would always sit in the very front row right next to the door in the padded seats, because they would make less noise that way and I could just escape right outside the door. So everybody saw my kids being loud in church and everything, and nobody came up to me and said, can I help you? What can I do for you? Can I take this one while you... It was always talking about me in ward council and saying, she's disruptive, her kids are disruptive. What do we do about this situation? You know, so I didn't even feel comfortable asking my ward members for help.
Yeah.
And, you know, I've told my sisters some of the horror stories. I was in the same ward for 22 years. My sister was like, yeah, your ward sucks. It's not the church. It's not the culture. It's your ward. Your ward sucks, you know? And I was like, I think some of that's baked in. You know?
Yeah, that's always the excuse. It's not the church, it's not the doctrine, it's the people. And it's like,
and it's the exact opposite.
Yeah.
It is the church. It's not the people. And Kate and I say that a lot, that, you know, a lot of the people, not all of them, but a lot of them are really good people just trying to do the best that they can. But leadership and the way the church is structured just supports some really bad. I mean, it's based around coercion and manipulation. That's the doctrine underneath everything. So it is the church. It's not the people.
Yeah.
Well, and then you've got
directed in certain ways. So
then you've got you know, Dallin Oaks. I swear he has become the king of horrible things that he has said. He once gave a talk on divorce. And, you know, he jokingly said something like, well, you know, the best way to not, you know, marry someone who's, you know, a horrible spouse is to not date them. And I was like, okay, you don't understand how this works. And, you know, it's little comments like that, or, you know, divorce is 90% selfishness, you know, things like that they're told. And, you know, as long as you
so gaslighting.
Yeah,
Like,
and if
it
you
is.
we'll
both
go
have
back
the
to-
faith in the gospel, that's all you need. That you can, everything else is just something you can work out. And if you can't do that, then you're selfish.
Right.
And you know,
like the thing that like really bothers me about statements like that is it's so self-serving of the church.
Yeah.
It behooves them to keep as many people married with a bunch of children, tithe, just because it's harder to get out when you are in that
Yeah.
situation.
And
So
busy and unhappy.
yeah,
exactly. But then by saying, if you're having these thoughts, if you're even thinking about divorce, you're probably a shitty person.
Yeah.
Because that selfishness is the
Yeah.
ultimate selfishness, because
Yeah.
it serves only the church. And that's what gets me like super riled up. It's just
Yeah.
so.
There probably was, Megan. There probably were people saying, well, you know, it was her choice to marry someone that wasn't a member. If he was a good,
100%.
yeah, if he was a good priesthood holder, he'd be sitting right there by her side. And I'm like,
Right.
or
And there were-
he could be sitting on the stand, left for church at 2.5 hours
Right.
before you, and you're still there with 6 kids by yourself.
Right.
So
Right. And 100%, I'm sure that there were
talking about a
people,
friend.
because a lot,
Sure.
yeah, a lot of people knew my parents. They knew my parents were temple workers. And so a lot of people knew my parents and would tell me all the time how much they loved my parents. But so they kind of knew a little bit of my, backstory, sort of. And so I'm sure 100% there were people who were like, well, she wasn't very faithful in her
Yeah.
late teenage years. And
Yeah.
if she had just been faithful and married a returned missionary
Yeah.
instead of this non-member, I mean, that's what you get when you marry a non-member.
That's exactly right.
And so it's like, why should we help her? She made her bed. And the exact same thing came back to bite me in the ass after I got divorced. I was struggling with my faith. I was struggling with my kids. I was struggling to make ends meet. My former spouse was not much help. And I was alienated from my parents. And I was, I was alone. I was alone in San Antonio with basically no parents. My sister, who I was the only one that I was really close to, lived in Utah. My younger brother, who we've always been friendly and good to each other, was deployed in the worst places imaginable.
Yeah.
So I really didn't have any family that I could rely on. So I was relying on my ward family to help me. And when I got divorced, not a single person came to visit me or ask me how I was doing. I had one person who used to be my visiting teacher who would write me letters. And I loved that.
Yeah.
But it was also like, I think people were afraid to ask me why I got divorced. I think they were afraid to talk about it because that becomes like a shelf breaker kind of an item for a lot of people. This is the other thing. When you leave an abusive relationship, you become a trigger to other people who are in abusive relationships and don't want to admit it.
Exactly.
And so a lot of people just didn't want to talk to me. So I went
That's
to my
exactly
bishop,
right.
same bishop from before, by the way.
Yeah.
So I went to him and I said, I'm struggling and I need some help. And he was like, okay, what do you mean? And I was like, well, like I come to church every Sunday and I have my 3 callings that I'm fulfilling and, making sure that my kids are participating in literally every single thing because I'm terrified for them not to. I think people like see me out there and they think that I'm swimming because I'm like, out there in the water, and I'm not, I'm drowning. And he sat back in his chair and he chuckled and he said, well, what do you expect us to do for you? And the message was basically like, you chose to get divorced.
Exactly.
What am I supposed to do about that? And again, not to shame him because he didn't know better.
Right.
0 training for that kind of a situation. All he had with him was 65 years of Mormon indoctrination and
Right.
patriarchy, and women's voices don't matter.
Right.
On his side
of that culture, and I'll shame him a little bit. He's not a therapist, but I'm not a therapist, and I have empathy. Like, that is 0 empathy. That is not being a good human being. And you don't need to be a licensed therapist to understand the suffering of another human being. The idea of looking at somebody who has left an abusive relationship that was causing them pretty serious damage and harm, and looking at them and saying, well, it's your fault that you left that. I don't care that it was a shitty situation. What do you want? Like the gaslighting and the victim blaming of that. You don't have to be a therapist to know not to victim blame. So I don't know who this guy is, but I will shame him.
Well, and you know what's funny is if you would have been a divorced woman with young babies who the missionaries had happened to knock on the door and you had started taking discussions, the ward would have been soup and homemade bread every day. Can we come over and pick up your 3-year-old? Because
Bingo.
they're going to totally love you
Yep.
and do the love
Love
bombing
bomb
to
you.
get you to,
Mhm.
to
Yeah.
get you to join the church. And so that's exactly, and Erika, that's exactly what I said when I lost my son. It was like, well, she left the church, so
So
what do you think's gonna
this is
happen?
what you get.
Yeah.
And I was going to bring that up because sorry, 1 second, because Rene, it's sort of serendipitous that Rene happened to end up co-hosting this episode so she's been a co-host, but she was also a guest. She talked extensively about how when she lost her son, because she had left the church, no one reached out to her. It was the same sort of just cutoff. What do you expect us to do? So it's sort of serendipitous that you're here and you guys have had in this organization that operates in a certain way, very parallel experiences as women.
Yeah. And I agree with what you said, Erika. There is such a thing as compassion and empathy, but Mormon men are conditioned not to have compassion and empathy, especially not for Mormon women.
Yeah.
I was 6 months ago years old when a man who was raised in Mormonism first asked me, what was your experience like?
Yeah.
Like just in a conversation, like, wow, that must have been terrible for you. What was that experience like? I was like, literally no one has ever asked me that before.
So what did you say? I have a bunch of questions. What did you say and what did he say when you told, did you tell him you felt what I've heard from women, erased, silenced, etc.?
Yeah.
And what was his response? Was he actually wanting to hear what you had to say?
Well, I immediately shut off the part of my brain that wanted to do violent things. I was feeling very, very angry in that moment. And so I just said, all right, clearly I'm not going to get any help, but I'm going to advocate for my kids. And I said, okay, fine. Here's what I would like to have happen. I would love for the young men's and the young women's leaders to double down on shepherding my children, because that's the lingo you have to use. They need a little bit of extra attention and support. They're going through a really difficult time. Their mental health is suffering. This is really hard for them. They don't understand divorce. They don't get it because we never fought in front of our kids. We got along pretty well most of the time. So to most of my kids, it was a complete shock. It wasn't a shock to my oldest daughter, but she was already, out having relationships of her own and stuff. I just advocated for my kids, and that's what I asked for. I said, also, I would really love it if my home teachers would actually come to my house, because up to that point, I had maybe one visit from a home teacher. And I think before that, from the time that I got divorced, it was so bad that the Christmas after my spouse and I split up, I bought a house, in the fall of that year. At Christmas time, there are a lot of people in my ward who would donate gift cards to people who were in need. They wanted to bring some gift cards to me. They went to my old address where I lived with my spouse for 22 years.
They didn't even know.
I had updated my information in the LDS app. They didn't even bother to look. So they went to the old house and my neighbors were like, yeah, they don't live here anymore.
Yeah.
And so then the guy called me and he was like, this is really weird, but I'm at your house and your neighbors are saying you don't live there anymore. I was like, yeah, I moved when I got divorced. He's
that
like,
often happens when you get divorced.
Yeah. And so from that day until that's the only visit I've ever had, except by the missionaries who keep leaving me these little cards because they're trying to claw my children back in.
So have you actually had your records removed? Have you resigned?
Yes.
You have?
Yeah, I did.
Okay.
In fact, to fast forward a little bit and to go back to what one of the concepts we were talking about, but to fast forward a little bit, I had been complaining from before I got divorced, but especially once I got divorced, I became like a third-class citizen in Mormonism. And I was ramping up this idea of okay, if the church is true, that's what I believe, it's true, but the culture fucking sucks. Yeah. It's awful. It's terrible. I hate it. And I would commiserate with my sister about this. And she would say, yeah, there's some things about the culture that are really harmful. It's really bad. We don't like it. So when I first wrote my book, there was a chapter in there about Mormonism. It was very apologetic. I even started out with a vocabulary lesson so that people would understand the in-speak. And then I started out with a very apologetic of this is what Mormons believe. And then I started talking about how it has been warped and the culture now has become really problematic for a lot of people, most especially for anyone who doesn't fit in the little box of Mormonism. My partner at the time, who I've been with him for 4 years, Samuel is his name. I wanted him to read it as a nevermo and say, like, have I said everything that needs to be said in this book about healing from trauma? And he was like, he was so angry he couldn't even get through the chapter. He was like, you can't say this. This is wrong. You can't talk about the church this way as if it's true, but the people are broken. He said, I was like, yeah, but the culture is really, he said, stop. The doctrine determines the culture.
Yes.
And it was like, shit, you're right.
Yeah.
So I'm the Nevermo in this podcast that Kate and I started, and I struggle with that a lot as a Nevermo. Like looking at there are really good people, and I knew really good people when I was working in Mormon Central, but they all belong to this really problematic organization, and I usually like veer or go into a rabbit hole once in an episode. So I'm going to do that now.
Yes, I love rabbit holes.
There's this great, I love the Golden Girls. It's a show that I watch as nostalgia. It's soothing to me because it was airing when I grew up, and it's a great show.
Love it.
The episode where Dorothy befriends a woman who's kind of hoity-toity and a little bit snooty, and then at some point they're all going to go to the Mortimer Club, which is this country club, and the woman's there. Sophia is going to bring a guest who happens to be Jewish, and she calls her into the kitchen. She says, "We can't go because he's Jewish," and Dorothy says, why do you subscribe to a club like this? And she says, well, they have a great sandwich and the parking is free. And she says, besides, it's not my policy, it's theirs. And Dorothy says, yes, but you tolerate it. And that's kind of how I feel. Like,
absolutely.
if you belong to the organization, you tolerate the misogyny, you tolerate the homophobia, you tolerate the racism. Even if you're a really, really good person, you're tolerating all the shittiness. And I have a different perspective from Kate. For me, that is the thing that I always struggle with living in Utah now as an Ever Mormon, that it sounds like your partner struggled with when they read this and said, this isn't necessarily the whole truth.
Yeah, exactly. And I will say that too, like on my way out of the church, the thing, we all talk about our shelf and we had little items on our shelf throughout the years. When the November 2015 exclusion policy came out, it was too big for my shelf.
Yeah.
It was like earth-shatteringly devastating to me.
Yeah.
And can you say what that is specifically? Because half of our audience is never Mormon and isn't going to know what you're talking about.
So in November of 2015, the LDS Church issued a new policy regarding children of same-sex couples. And the policy was that if you were a child of a same-sex couple and you wanted to get baptized, you essentially had to denounce your parents' relationship and say that what they were doing was wrong and bad, and that you were never going to be in a same-sex relationship, and that you wanted to adhere to the principles of the church, which it's horrific for so many reasons. But one of the main reasons is because an 8-year-old child is not psychologically capable of differentiating themselves from their parents on that level. It would be like psychological death for a child to do that. So that's one. Two is like, this is basically a punishment for same-sex couples to say, like, we don't approve of what you're doing, so guess what? Your kids can't get baptized. Like, it was so horrific. It was read from the pulpit in my sacrament meeting, and then the bishop said, same bishop, by the way, if anybody is in church, we're going to have a meeting after the block of anyone who's in church leadership. And I was in the primary presidency at the time. And so all of the presidencies got together in the Relief Society room after this meeting was over. And he said, if there's anybody in church leadership who has a problem with this policy, I want to know about it right now.
Yikes.
And what I took from that message was, we don't really want you in church leadership if you have a problem with the policy. What ended up happening is that sort of one by one, people started getting up and bearing their testimony and saying, like, I trust the brethren, I believe the brethren. And I was in the back of the room in tears, just bawling. Yada, yada. Bishop ended the meeting and people were, kind of shuffling out. And my one really dear friend went up to the bishop, and she also was crying, and she was talking to him, and I couldn't hear what she was saying, but I was like, okay, I'm going to keep my eye on her, because she was in the primary presidency as well. And I was like, maybe this is somebody who feels the same way that I do. At the time, you know, having teenagers myself, and I was a choir teacher at this time, and I used to bring my kids, my students, to church to sing at Christmas and at Easter. And I was like, how can I bring those kids into this place when some of them are not welcome here, when some of them have families and parents who would not be welcome here? Even though the sign on the outside says visitors welcome, that's not really what that means.
Yeah.
And so I was just so beside myself that I couldn't speak. And so I went up to the bishop, and I started to try to say something. And I just shook my head and walked out, because there was nothing I could say that was going to adequately express my grief and the pain that I felt on behalf of all of the people who were going to be gutted by that policy.
Yeah.
So while I had questions and doubts and problems in the past, that was the beginning of the end for me. What I decided was, I'm going to fight from within. Every time something comes up about the LGBTQ community, I'm going to raise my hand. I'm going to be like, but shouldn't we just love everybody? You know? And I was like, you know, maybe I can help. I can't change anything on the institutional level, but maybe I can help people have a different idea for at least a second. And maybe that will help somehow.
Yeah.
But what I found out is that my friend, who I was counting on to think the same way that I was released from her calling.
Oh, okay. So
And
she did
then-
voice.
And then in the wake of my divorce, I was like, can I please have maybe 2 callings instead of 4? You know, because I had been teaching Relief Society, and I was a ward missionary in a ward where we baptized 30 people a year. So it was like a part-time job. And I was playing the piano, and I was playing the organ, all that stuff. And I was like, just the organ. Can I just do that? Like, just show up and play the organ, go home. That's all I can handle right now. And so I wasn't really in a teaching position where I could affect change that way. And what I increasingly found is that people didn't want to hear what I had to say.
No.
And I
No.
stopped getting called on. And eventually I got to the point where I couldn't even sit in Relief Society. So I would take my kids, we would go to sacrament meeting. I'd let them go to their meetings, and I would go sit in the car for
Yeah.
2 hours until it was only 2 hours. And then, you know, and then once the pandemic happened, I just never went back to church, because I thought, you know, I was divorced, you know, 3 years. I was finally able to admit to myself that I was bisexual. And I was like, what place does a divorced bisexual feminist have in this church? None.
Ew.
You know,
That would be a new.
And then my
I think
son,
we're going to title the episode that. What place does a divorced bisexual woman have
feminist.
in the Mormon church? Feminist
Yeah.
in the Mormon church.
Yeah. And then my son came out as pansexual, and then my other son came out as bisexual. And I was like, yeah, this just isn't going to work for me. And what's really funny is that I had this chalkboard on my wall in the house, in my marital home. And it was a quote from a song, and I can't remember exactly how it goes, but it was something about little houses, and how, like, if we had more space between and fewer walls to separate, you know, then we wouldn't be as close. Like, love grows best in little spaces like this, because our house was a tiny house, and there were 6 kids in it and only 2 bathrooms. And so that kind of was my motto. It was like, we might be crowded, but we love each other. And when I got divorced and I bought my new house, I was like, I don't know what to put on this chalkboard anymore, because that, like, illusion was kind of destroyed.
Interesting.
And I'm a big fan of the Marvel universe, and I love the character Groot, because he only says these 3 words, I am Groot, and specifically in that order, but it always means something different. So he uses those 3 words to express himself, and there's only one person that really understands him, and it's his little raccoon friend. And so he'll say something like, I am Groot, and the raccoon will go, are you kidding? I can't believe you're bringing that up at this time. And he'll go, I am Groot. And the raccoon will go, all right, I understand. You know, it's like, it's his own. And so what I did is I wrote on that chalkboard, I am Groot 47 times, because I was like, I really don't know. Other people are going to interpret it in the way that they want to anyway. And I kind of want my kids to come up with their own thing rather than having me impose some kind of a thing on them. And when I got past that stage, I erased the board and I wrote 2 things. Don't be an asshole, and remember who the fuck you are. And that is my life's motto for my kids now.
Yeah, that's amazing.
So
That's absolutely amazing.
rewinding just a little bit to when Samuel told me he got angry and he was like, you can't write this. This is too apologetic. And I was like, okay, so here we are. I hate the LGBTQ policies in the church. Maybe the brethren are just getting it wrong. I mean, they got it wrong about Black people in the priesthood. And they repaired it eventually. I'm just hoping it's not going to take another 150 years before we get this right. So I was like, I want to know where it went wrong. Because I remember when I was teaching gospel doctrine, I remember that there was at least one, if not two, Black people that were ordained to the priesthood. They did hold the priesthood. I was like, I'm going to go dig that up and find it. I want to know what happened. Where did we get it wrong? I found out that, yes, Elijah Abel and two of his sons were ordained to the priesthood, as well as at least one other Black person. And they were exercising their priesthood, and they were speaking, and they were talking. All this was all during Joseph Smith's era. Joseph Smith had ordained Elijah Abel. And what happened is that when Brigham Young took over, he told Elijah Abel, nope, you can't do that anymore. And then he put a stop to for any further ordinations. And I was like, okay, so it was Brigham Young that was the asshole. Got it. And so I started digging into some more of his policies and where this possibly could have turned into where we are today. And I came across a master's thesis by Shannon Caldwell Montez called The Secret Mormon Meetings of 1922. And this was a meeting where B.H. Roberts, who was a church historian, had written a 132-page essay on all of the problems with the historicity of the Book of Mormon. And he came and he presented it to the 15 leaders of the church in Salt Lake. And do you know what their response was? They each stood up and bore their testimony of the truthfulness of the Book of Mormon.
Right.
I was like, this was literally 1922. Guess which year the church was incorporated? 1922.
Yeah.
I was like, dear God, they know. The
Yeah.
leadership knows that this is bullshit and they've been covering it up this whole time.
Yeah.
And so I went down a rabbit hole and I came up 3 days later with no tears left in my body. And I was like, I'm done.
Yeah.
That's it. I'm never going back. And so on February 14th of 2023, I sent in my resignation.
It's amazing. You know what? You know, it's funny. You know who Brian Hale is, right? And
Yeah.
I don't know if you saw the most recent one that he did with, it was Steve Pinecker on his Mormon book review. And he was talking about this whole idea that you don't believe in polygamy, that you think that Joseph Smith didn't practice polygamy, that as you said, that Brigham Young was the asshole and he's the one that did the whole thing. And so I'm listening to this and I'm like, because the next thing he said was, so what you're saying is, if you want to be a member of the church today, but every leader after after Joseph Smith, Brigham Young on, was a lying asshole, that doesn't work. And I remember going, thank you, Brian, the first thing I've ever heard that I agree with you. And then it went downhill from there because Steve knows his stuff. And so Steve kept saying, yes, but what about, and then he'd go, well, I don't know entirely about that, but I think, and I'm just like, oh, see, no, you lost me. I tried to be on your court for just a little bit, but you just couldn't do it. But that you are exactly right. It's just, they know, and they've always known, but you can't stop the system that was set up. Book of Mormon, Moroni on the front, on the temples. How are they going to get out of this? I mean, they're trying hard. And honestly, I know they're going to, at some point, this Christian nationalist movement that they're doing, they're slowly going to bury the Book of Mormon down into some kind of a nothingness, but it's going to take 20 years or whatever, maybe a generation to pass. But that is the goal. They are trying to become Christian Methodist, accepted into the world so they can join the Christian nationalist movement and take over the country. Or the world, who knows? But no, you're absolutely right. Oh my gosh.
Yeah.
That exactly what Rene said. Leadership knows, and like all of the evidence is there, which makes everything even more insidious. Like that is why they tell people not to read certain things. They've all read it. They know that with obviously now it's on the website, I believe, the polygamy of Joseph Smith, the abject racism of Brigham Young and the polygamy massage. They know all of these things, and which is why they try to keep people from reading that, because they know then their business will collapse if they came out tomorrow and said, you know what, we were wrong. And there isn't, I don't know, if I only know what I know from what Kate and I have talked about, and what I've talked about with different guests over the episodes that we've had. But if Joseph Smith isn't real, if Brigham Young isn't real, if those prophets we're not great people and we're not actually prophets, there's no there. Like everything sort of falls apart. So they can't actually go, hey, we were wrong about this, but we're right about this stuff. Because that's the foundation. And if you rip the foundation out, everything falls.
So the one thing, Megan, I was going to ask, because of all the stuff that's going on right now with the Epstein and the Utah senator and whatnot, have you ever thought about, publishing the babysitter and the husband that was trafficking you and getting that out in the open? And was this in Texas?
No, it was in South Dakota.
Oh, okay.
And I did finally make a police report, but I was 45 years old when I did it. The husband is dead. And the wife, of course, denies that anything happened. And so what the police officer told me was that, short of her opening her front door and them seeing like photographic equipment or something, they don't have any probable cause unless there's someone who can corroborate. And so far, none of the other kids have come forward. And I remembered the names of 3 of them. One of them was very vehemently, adamantly like, take my name off of this. I don't want to have anything to do with it. And the other 2 we never really could find.
And were they daycare people? Is that what the deal was?
Yeah, it was. My mom had gotten a job and she would just send us over there in the morning before the bus came. And then she would send us over, and then we would go back to their house after school until she got home from work. Yeah. But also there was like a park right across the street from where they lived. And in the summertime, we were there all the time. And the Parks and Rec department would come over and like play games with us and stuff like that. And so it was sort of like when there were kids at the park, he would come outside and water his front lawn. And that was like the signal that we were all supposed to go over there. The ones that knew we're supposed to go over there. And he would like one by one say, okay, go inside, not you today, you go inside. And so it was just a thing that was happening. And in his basement, they had recording equipment. And so they took pictures and videos of us kids. And every once in a while, they would have somebody come in to the basement to watch this happening. And I would see money change hands, and gosh. So it was, they definitely were selling our pictures and our videos. And I tell this story almost every time I talk about this, because I know at some point somebody is going to find this for me. I was watching TV one day and there was one of those public service announcements about like, don't yell at your kids, don't shake the baby, that kind of stuff. Right. And it was like a mom yelling at her kid. It was really triggering for me because I was experiencing some of that at home, mom berating this child. The screen went dark. The announcer said something to the effect of like, don't hurt your children. And they put the phone number up there along with the picture of a little girl who was in tears. And I looked over at the screen and it was me. And I know for sure that it was me because I have a mole. It's one of the reasons I've never gotten rid of it. Yeah. But I knew it was me. And I was like, how did they get that picture? I was really confused. I was like, how did they get that picture? I could not figure it out because my brain really did a great job of protecting myself and compartmentalizing all that stuff. So my memories of what actually happened were very fragmented until I went to go do my EMDR. And then a lot of things came back. Some things I probably will never remember, which is probably good, but a lot of things came back enough that I could process it and heal from it. Somewhere out there, somebody, and I've scoured the internet looking for 80s, this would have been anywhere between 1981 and 1986. Yeah. And somewhere out there, somebody has that picture or knows where it came from or has seen that commercial or something. So it's not that I have to have it, but it would be really validating because I got told a lot that this never happened to me. Yeah. And that was kind of my family's reaction, was that like that, there's no way that could have ever happened. And so I felt really gaslighted until somebody else finally corroborated it. And that was very healing for me. So I imagine that, finding that picture or knowing the origin of it or something, would probably be the last little piece of that puzzle that still, every once in a while in my brain, I still gaslight myself and I still think, did that really happen? Because so many of people have told me that it didn't, and that it's impossible for that to have happened and have me not remember every single detail of it until I was older.
That is such a fictional thing. It's almost like the same thing when people have a tragedy, the police show up and they think that there's this TV version of how people should react to a death or a murder that they're looking at, and they're like, well, our wife was laying blood all over the living room and he didn't even cry. And it's like, yeah, because it's not television, it's not
Right.
scripted, and people don't act the same. But that was the
Right.
other question I was going to ask was, did you ever tell your mom or dad, or when you were young,
Yeah.
did you say, I don't want to go there anymore, or anything like that? And
No, I never did, but I definitely exhibited a lot of symptoms of a kid who was being sexually abused. One of which was that I ordered a Playboy magazine to be sent to my house
oh my gosh.
because I was I was almost to an obsessive level when I would see people, I would imagine what their genitalia would look like because I wanted to be prepared for what was going to happen.
Oh my
And
gosh.
so I think, ordering that magazine for me was like, I want to know what all of this looks like because I don't want to be surprised. And my mom was furious when the magazine showed up. And I think she thought like either my dad or one of my brothers had ordered
Yeah.
it,
Yeah.
and I was not about to tell her that it was me. But that's not something that a normal 7, 8, 9-year-old child would do.
Right.
Right. And so those kinds of symptoms, as well as just like I have so many gaps. Like I remember, and this is what I write about in the book, I remember so many details. I have a really excellent memory. But what always bothered me is that when I thought about the babysitter's house, I could remember all the people and all the details in the house, but I could never remember what was behind the basement door. I remember going down to
Oh,
the basement. I remember trying to open the door, and I would have this recurring dream all the time where I would be outside the door. I would want to go in because I was afraid my siblings were being hurt, or I was afraid something bad was happening in there, and I wanted to go in, but I never could actually like turn the handle and go in.
no.
And so, I had all of these fragments of memories of bad things happening. And I also had all of these symptoms where like I would freeze. I would get into freeze anytime that a boy wanted to do anything with me, kissing, holding hands, anything. I also had all of these worthiness issues where I was like, I don't deserve to speak up. I literally could not tell people no because that was the programming that I received. To be really specific about it, what the babysitter told me was he said, have you ever been to McDonald's? And I like wouldn't answer. And he would go, yes, you have. You've been to McDonald's. Do you ever get French fries when you go to McDonald's? Yes, you do. You always get French fries. Nobody goes to McDonald's without getting French fries. Well, you are the French fries. And it is your responsibility to make sure that everybody who comes here gets French fries, however they ask for it, whatever they want. That's your role. And this is what all little girls do. This is what all little girls are made for. And you don't ever tell anybody they can't have French fries. You don't ever tell anybody that you would prefer if they were served cold. Like you don't get to make any of those decisions. You serve the fries the way that we've told you to serve them, and you do it the same way every time, and you do it no matter what. And so that's where some of those crying pictures came from.
Yeah.
Is because
Yeah.
like, I don't want to do this. I don't want to participate. Well, you don't have a choice. This is what you do, or there are consequences. And if you don't do this the right way, we're going to tell your parents all about this. And you're the one who decided to come down here. This was your choice. You chose to do it. So you're responsible for everything that has happened. And if we tell your parents, they're going to be really mad at you, and they're probably not even going to love you anymore.
So there again, you've got someone telling you that this is your fault. So, I mean, this is like you said, you can understand even better why you accepted this behavior for over 20 years
Yeah.
because you've been told this your whole life.
Right. Throughout my whole
Yes.
life, my underlying question all the time was, what is wrong with me?
What did I
What's
do?
wrong with me? What did I
Yeah.
do wrong? Why can't I? And I remember writing this in my journal. There was this boy who came to visit me at my place of work and wanted to mess around with me, and I would freeze. And I remember writing in my journal and saying, I would talk to myself in a very harsh way, unfortunately. I would say, you don't even enjoy this. So why do you keep letting him do it? What is wrong with you? I just could not figure out what was going on. Like, what's wrong with me that I'm allowing somebody to do this when I don't enjoy it and I can't say anything. I just literally freeze. And so that was, it took me a really, really long time to unlearn all of that programming and to install new programming. And that's what EMDR did for me.
That's amazing.
That I'm worthy, that I deserve to have a voice. And that's what is the cover of my book. This is, I enrolled in that intensive outpatient therapy, which was 9 hours of group therapy every week. It was 3 hours every Monday, Wednesday, and Friday. And then Friday afternoon, I would have my like individual session with my therapist. And during one of these group sessions, we were doing a meditation about all the different chakra, which is, you know, the concept that you have these different points in your body that are associated with different colors. And after the chakra meditation, I did this self-portrait. So this is a self-portrait, and
Oh.
the voice chakra is this tiny little blue dot that you can barely see. It's not this one, because
Yeah.
that's the brain. It's this tiny little blue dot you can barely see. And so I think it might be interesting to do another self-portrait now, because now my voice, I feel like, is the biggest part of me, the brightest
Yeah.
part of me.
Yeah.
And whenever I get into a situation that I feel like is going to be stressful or, you know, possibly hurtful, or I'm worried or anxious about it, I close my eyes and I imagine this. And I close my eyes and it's like all those colors light up and I have all these flames walking behind me. And that's why I called it I Walked Through Fire to Get Here, because it was like the flames attached themselves to me and they live with me now, you know, but they don't hurt me anymore.
Yeah.
Now they're just this bright light that gets to help other people. I finished my intensive outpatient therapy. I was doing it in the summer of 2019, and my daughter lived in Rexburg at the time, and I had made plans to go up and visit her. I was supposed to stop in Arizona and visit my family members, the Coxes. I had asked Summer for, it's like, we haven't seen you guys in a really long time. You know, I want my kids to get to know your kids. You know, can I stay with you when we come through town? And she was like, sure, come and stay with us. But then I stopped hearing back from her as I was trying to confirm dates and details and everything. I just didn't hear from her anymore. So I made other arrangements. I went up to Idaho, visited my daughter. I finished my last session, I think just a couple of days before I got home in July of 2019. The day after I got home from that trip, I saw a post on my cousin's wife's Facebook page that Charles Vallow had been shot and killed. So I was this far from digging through all of the trauma that I had been through my entire life.
Yeah.
My sex trafficking as a child, my emotionally abusive upbringing, my emotionally and physically abusive coercive control marriage. I was fresh out of that when Lori decided to start killing people.
Yes, your story is captivating, and thank you so much for sharing it with us. There's a lot more stories to tell, so we will come back. We'll be back with Megan in the future and hear some more of her story as it relates to Lori Vallow. And we are also in the future going to do a very special episode. I won't spill it right now, but it's going to be a lot of fun and way less dark. So we have 2 more episodes with Megan coming up. And Rene, thank you so much for stepping in.
Pleasure.
Again, you are such a great co-host. I love all of your thoughts and everything that you have to say. So thank you so much for stepping in and co-hosting again. And if you guys, do either of you have anything to add before we sign off?
I just want to say thanks for having me. I'm so glad we ran into each other at Sunstone, because like I said, I've been a fan for a long time, and who knew that this would ever happen?
Yeah,
and it's great to be back with you again, Rene.
Yeah, it was so great.
With that, I guess we will wrap up until next time, and we can all say
cheers to deconstructing Mormonism.
That was a lot. I had to unmute my mic. You know, Megan is probably the best example that I've ever come across of someone who really has the survivor instinct. And I love her vulnerability, really being free and open with the experiences that she's had, and then the amount of therapy that she's gone through. And I love the fact that she's taken what has happened to her and she's now turning her life around to help other people. And if that isn't the perfect example of someone becoming visible, I don't know what is. So as usual, Erika is a kick, and I was so pleased to help her out and co-host with her on this interview with Megan. And I'm sure we will do it again. I'm sure we have some things planned. And of course, Megan will be on She Became Visible as well. So thanks for joining me today. Don't forget to subscribe and like and share. That's all I ask. Do not ask for any kind of donations. I just need your subscription and your support. So thanks for joining me today on She Became Visible. See you next week. Bye-bye.